Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's online workshop, a workshop of CEN and CENELEC on personal protective equipment and medical devices dual-use products. My name is Els, and I will be moderating the webinar in the background. I'm working at CEN and CENELEC as a project manager, policy and partnerships, and as usual, I'm doing many of the webinar moderations. All attendees will be muted this morning, so you can use the Q&A panel to submit your questions. We kindly ask you to do so, and the speakers will go through the questions as much as possible at the good moment. Should your question remain unreplied, please bear in mind that we intend to make a Q&A report available via our website, as we usually do. This webinar has also been recorded, so you will receive in your inbox later on the full recording as well as the presentation of today. CEN and CENELEC are on Twitter at Standards4EU, so please feel free to talk about this subject with the hashtag Training for Standards. So without further ado, I'd like to go quickly through the agenda and then give the floor to the speakers. We will, of course, have an introduction and setting up a bit the scene and the context of this webinar. That will be done by Mr. Henk van Houten of the European Safety Federation and also part of the CEN CENELEC PPE Sector Forum. There will be an introduction to the legislative framework from Mario Gabriele Cosello from the European Commission, and the existing developments and key requirements for PPE products will be discussed as well. The same is true for the requirements for MD products. That will be done by Mr. Sven Schroppe from the CEN TC 205, working on non-active medical devices such as gloves, cones, and masks. You might know that we have asked participants to provide us with some statements. So we selected a few of them, and the persons that have been in contact with the support team of this webinar will have some time to provide us with some statements and discuss around these statements during the discussion time and the Q&A. And we finish with a wrap-up again of Henk van Houten. So please, without further ado, Henk, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Els, and welcome to everybody for this workshop. It's the first time we have this workshop or a similar workshop organized by the Sector Fora, Healthcare and PPE together. So for those who don't know me, as Els mentioned, I'm working for the European Safety Federation, which is the suppliers of personal protective equipment. But today I'm here mainly as the chair of the CEN CENELEC PPE Sector Forum, and as such I will try to introduce the speakers and streamline the Q&A and discussion session afterwards. To give you an idea, well, when we started preparing, if it's the first time you're going to talk about a topic, it's always, will there be an interest? So apparently, yes, we had about 250 registrations, and I see in the meantime, we're around 180 participants. So the very vast majority of the registrants are actually also online this morning with us. So thank you for that, and I hope that it will be an interesting morning. Now, why did we start talking about organizing such a workshop? Well, of course, we all remember COVID and what we've learned there, and one of the things that came out there was, okay, there's different functions for personal protective equipment and medical devices. A mask is not a mask. There are different functions, and they are not all the same, and they have different requirements. But on the other hand, we also realized that in some settings, and then I'm talking about healthcare as an example, products with a combination of medical device function and personal protective equipment function would be helpful to ensure the highest level of protection, both of the wearer of the product and of the patient and the environment. So that was one setting. To give some examples there, and later during the morning, we will definitely hear in more details. But we're talking, when we're thinking about COVID, we're talking about masks, obviously, but also gloves, garments, face shields. That's the main products in that context. Now, however, there were already products on the market, and there are still, that have nothing to do with the healthcare sector, but still combine medical device functions with personal protective equipment functions. And then to give you two examples, one is protective glasses with corrective lenses. The protective glasses function obviously is PPE. Corrective lenses are under the medical device legislation. So the combination, if you combine the two, you have to look at both legislations. And that includes, by the way, sunglasses with corrective lenses, because sunglasses are also PPE. And the other one is safety footwear. Either you have a completely orthopedic adaptation, special production of the safety footwear for one specific person, or you can work in some cases with orthopedic inlay soles. Both cases, the orthopedic part is medical device because it's correcting a health or a health issue. And of course, the safety footwear is PPE. So the combination again makes it a product with dual function. So just to give you an examples, but again, we will hear more during the morning and also other examples. I want to remind you that this is a workshop organized by CEN CENELEC. So we are focusing on the role of standardization. What can standards do to make life easier of all concerned stakeholders, and not only manufacturers, but also conformity assessment bodies and authorities, but also users, to clarify, to make sure that if there is a combination of different requirements that are covered in standards, that these are as harmonized as possible. Of course, standardization cannot be seen as a separate element. There's always relation to conformity assessment, to market surveillance, and so on. But again, we focus on the standardization part and what standardization can do in this situation. I'm sure that this could be the start of further work and maybe even further workshops, maybe on specific topics in the future. So we're setting a quite general scene this morning. And to do that, as Els briefly mentioned, we have Mario from the Commission, from DG Sante, who will give some legal background. Then we have speakers from two technical committees, Giovanna and Sven, one from the medical device, one from the PPE, and they will share their experiences and thoughts. And then we have indeed some participants who will give a short statement. And after that, of course, plenty of time for discussion questions. So don't hesitate to use the Q&A function. With that, it's my pleasure to give the floor to Mario Gabrielli. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Nele, for sharing this. We have a few poll questions. So to start, it would be nice to have an idea what your background or what kind of products you're familiar with. So is PPE, medical devices, both, or something else? So if you could quickly respond, and I see that there's quite some responses already arriving. That gives us a little bit of an idea of who's in the workshop. So if I see the result at the moment, we had a good participation. We have about 70% is familiar with PPE, about 40% with medical devices. Also around 40% mentions the combination of both, and then under 10% with an other background. So it seems that we have a good mix of backgrounds for the discussions, which can only make them more interesting. Thank you for this, and I think we can close the poll. I don't see any answers arriving anymore. So now, it's my pleasure to give the floor to Mario Gabrielli Cosellu from the European Commission. As I said, DG Sante in the unit dealing with medical devices. But please, Mario, you can introduce yourself a lot better than I can, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Henk. Good morning, everybody. I would like also to thank CEN and CENELEC for organizing this quite interesting and useful initiative, because indeed the point on the interrelation between personal protective equipment and medical devices come to a very first stage in the recent past, and it is a topic for reflection and further work in the next months. Also in the Commission, indeed, from the point of view, both legal point of view and the standardization point of view. So I would like to provide a short introduction from the legal point of view, so just to setting the scene in this sense, and then leaving the floor to the experts to enter more into detail of products and standards related to the concerned products. The next slide, please. So indeed, first of all, I would like to talk about the common EU policy, which is underlying both legislation on personal protective equipment and medical devices, which is the new legislative framework. Then indeed, we will talk a bit about the regulation 2016-425 on PPE and the regulation 2017-745 on medical devices. First of all, indeed, we have to mention that the Commission, since already some time, adopted a specific policy to develop EU legislation on harmonization legislation on health, safety, and performance of industrial and consumer products in the internal market. It was called in 1985, we have the new approach, and then in 2008, we have an improvement of the new approach, which is called the new legislative framework. The new legislative framework policy consists essentially of three legislative acts. We have the regulation on accreditation. We have the framework decision, which is like a toolbox for the development of legislation. And then the more recent one is the regulation on market surveillance. As an horizontal guidance, it's always worth to mention the Blue Guide of the implementation of the EU product rules, very recently revised to update it with the very latest developments, which is very, very useful to provide a number of useful indications and comments on a lot of the common elements of the legislation, especially, for example, on placing on the market, on economic operators, on standards, on conformity assessments, and so on and so far. Next slide. Indeed, we have to underline the common characteristics of the legislation, European legislation, based on the policy, on the new legislative framework policy. The legislative acts are structured by laying out the scope and the exclusions, a set of general and specific definitions. There are a number of provisions on placing on the market, making available on the market, putting into service. The roles and obligations of economic operators are specified. Then we have a number of essential requirements which are established indeed in the law as compulsory compliance, while technical specifications, it is to say the specific technical solutions to comply with the essential requirements, are laid down in harmonized standards, voluntary harmonized standards. Then we have always a categorization or classification of products and the related conformity assessment procedures on the basis of the risk of the product, the risk associated to the products. For medium and high risk products, it is necessary the intervention of a third-party conformity assessment body, the so-called notified bodies. And then we have the provision on CE marking, the declaration of conformity, the technical documentation to be prepared by the manufacturer, the certificates issued by the notified body when necessary, then other provision on accreditation of notified bodies, market surveillance from national competent authorities, and so on. So this next slide, these provisions can be found in the two legislation we are talking about today, which are relevant for this kind of dual use, potentially dual use products. Regulation 2016-425 on personal protective equipment was adopted in 2016. It is fully applicable since 2018. In the web page, you can find a lot of useful documents, including the PPE regulation guidelines. There is a specific definition of PPE, from which we have to underline that we are talking about equipment intended to be worn or held by a person for protection of this person against specific risks. Then the PPE regulation laid down three categories of risks, from category 1 of minimal risks to category 3 very serious risks. We will see later on indeed that the products we are talking about usually are considered as category 3 PPE, so of high risk because they protect against, for example, biochemical or viral elements and so on. So in this sense, it will be necessary the intervention of a notified body, which is an important feature to be taken into account when comparing with the products under the medical devices regulation. In the PPE regulation, we have a set of essential health and safety requirements. And then up to 5 conformity assessment procedures according to the categorization of PPE. Of course, for medium and high risk PPE, the conformity assessment is more in depth with respect to the low risk. The next slide is about just a short pin on harmonized standards in support of the PPE regulation. We have the publication in the official journal of references of standards to confer presumption of conformity. We underline again that the use of standards in Europe is voluntary, but indeed the use of the standard cited in the official journal confer this presumption of conformity, which is a quite useful and convenient feature for manufacturers. I mentioned here some examples of harmonized standards for potentially dual-use PPE products. We have the standard on face mask, the famous FFP2 and P3 standards. We have a standard on protective gloves, and we have also a standard on protective clothing, including gowns or similar. And these standards are already cited in the official journal to confer presumption of conformity under the PPE regulation. The next slide makes the same presentation for the medical devices regulation 2017-745. It was adopted indeed in 2017 and fully applicable from May to 21. Also, in this case, in the web page, you can find a lot of documents, including guidance documents, publication, and fact sheets to help in the smooth implementation of this legislation. The definition of medical device is a bit long in the regulation indeed, but in short, we can say that we are talking about products intended by the manufacturer to be used for human beings for specific medical purposes. This is very important because to discriminate, to identify whether a product is a medical device, can be considered as a medical device or not, we have to take into account very much the intended use of this product and the purpose, the environment for which this product should be used. It is not always easy indeed. For that, among other guidance documents, we have a quite extensive guide on borderline and classification of medical devices, providing a number of examples. The medical devices regulation established up to 4 risk classes, taking into account the intended purpose of the devices and their inherent risks. We have for lower risk, we have the class 1 medical devices up to the class 3 for higher risks. And in a similar way as seen in the PP regulation, for lower risks, in principle, conformity assessment procedures do not require the intervention of a notified body, unless specific cases, for example, for class 1 medical devices placed on the market in sterile condition. And while for higher risk as class 2A, 2B, and 3, the intervention of a notified body is necessary. Also, the medical device regulation set out a number of general safety and performance requirements related, or in particular, to the design, manufacture, and the information supplied with the device. And provides for up to 3 conformity assessment procedures and their combination according to the classification of the medical device. The next slide also mentions the fact that we have also harmonized standards in support of the medical devices regulation, published in the official journal to confirm presumption of conformity. We have to say that the publication of standards under the medical device is still a recent process. We have still a limited number of standards in the official journal, but the work is going on according to the MDR standardization request issued in 2021. Among the standards to be developed, not yet in the official journal, but under development right now, we have the 455 series on medical gloves for single use. We have the series on surgical clothing and drapes. And we have also, in particular, the standards 14683 on medical face masks, which is, as I said, again, is not yet harmonized under the new regulations, but right now we have the harmonized standards under the old directive, which are not able, unfortunately, to confirm presumption of conformity with the new regulation, but still are useful to be taken into account for the conformity assessment. With that, from my side, for the time being, that's all. Just to recall another general feature of the new legislative approach and the legislation such as PPE regulation and medical devices regulation. When a product has characteristics of intended use which can be considered under more than one legislation, it will be necessary to apply the requirements to comply with the requirements of both legislation, which could be the case indeed of dual-use products, which can be considered as PPE when they provide protection to the user, to the wearer of the PPE, and can be considered medical devices as well when they provide protection rather to not to the wearer, but to other people, in particular to patients, according to the intended use of this device. And in this sense, it will be necessary to consider both regulation and the applicable requirements. But this will be the subject of the next presentation with the contribution of experts. So thanks a lot, and we will continue working on it.
Thank you, Mario. If I may, as we are well in time, in any case, I see a couple of questions in the Q&A that maybe you can already address at this stage. Or one is, the first one is more a statement, but the person writing it is looking for confirmation. So PPE can be used as medical device if it meets the legislative requirements for medical device and PPE at the same time, and vice versa. Specifically, for example, respirator must pass tests according to EN 149 and EN 14683, or using EN ISO 22610 and the legal requirements set out in the regulation 2016-425 for PPE and 745-2017 for medical device. A product certified as medical device must pass PPE certification as well if you have the dual function. Otherwise, dual use of the product cannot be allowed, and it cannot be claimed for dual use. In my view, that's a correct statement, but I just want to double check with you, Mario, this is indeed the case. So either if you have the dual function and you claim the dual function, you have to fully comply with both legislations.
Yes, in principle, it's correct. This is the object of this webinar and the work we are carrying out, because I would say maybe it's not so common in the market to find this kind of products, but still we had several examples, but especially it could be worrying when some products are placed or presented on the market with incorrect claims. So playing a bit between the two legislation, maybe even to take advantage from some feature of the legislation. The typical case, if we found, for example, with masks which are presented as surgical masks, so will be medical device class 1 without the need of intervention of a notified body, while in fact the products also offer protection for the wearer, so it will be considered as a PPE, and in this case it will be a PPE category 3 with the intervention of a notified body. So at the end, indeed, all of us know that the declaration of conformity must be a single declaration of conformity. But when the products would have characteristics under both regulations, it will be necessary to comply with both regulations. So it's quite delicate because out there are a lot of cases which can cause confusion. And our idea indeed is to contribute to clear this confusion.
Okay, thank you. Then I also see a comment and a question made by Michael Tierbach. I'm sure, Mario, you also know him quite well. And he just refers, and I can confirm, there used to be an interpretative document issued by the Commission on products being both PPE and medical devices, but in that case it was still both, in both cases still the previous directives. Mm-hmm. And the question is, are the Commission services thinking of issuing such a document with references to current PPE and medical device regulations again? I know we've been discussing about this already quite some time ago, and it was mentioned, yeah, we should do that, and we will do that. But so far, it's not ready, as I understand.
Yeah, no, indeed, we have an interpretative document which was issued some years ago, And I would say that indeed we are already in contact with the colleagues in the PPE sector to update this document, because in principle the substantial contents of this document are still valid, and indeed the document is still available on the website. But indeed it will be necessary to update it, also indeed taking into account the new legislation in both sectors and also the specific clauses of the regulations. You may have noted that in the new medical devices regulation there is no longer a specific reference to PPE, while in the previous directive it was, but still we have a general clause stating that in case other requirements are to be considered in the device, it will be necessary to apply also the relevant legislation. But indeed, yes, we are going to work on this document to republish it, update it, and to provide useful guidance to everybody also in this.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make a general comment. I see already some quite specific questions on specific types of products and so on. I will treat those after the presentations of Giovanna and Sven, as they might already give some answers or some ideas on answering those. So if they don't come now, don't panic, they're not forgotten.
In any case, yes, I'm going to reply to a number of questions in written. So
okay, thank you for that as well. And as Els was mentioning in the beginning, a report of the Q&A will be prepared and then put on the website of CEN and CENELEC. So that everybody can read them afterwards. I also see a question again from Pilar, where she mentions two manufacturers, one responsible for the PPE and one responsible for the medical device. Can two manufacturers appear on the label? I don't know, Mario, if you have a view on that. Mario, you're muted.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
sorry.
Sorry. Can you repeat, because I was writing down something I was not.
Okay. So there is a question
yes.
on a dual glove. So a category 3 PPE and a class 1 medical device. Mm-hmm. But there are two manufacturers included. Okay. Now.
Yes, I see the question. So about the possibility whether two manufacturers can appear on the label.
Yep.
I would say that both legislation define very clearly the role and obligation for manufacturers. And in principle, one manufacturer, we need to have one manufacturer to assume the responsibility. So in such a case, if there are two different manufacturers, it will be necessary to an agreement between them to designate who is going to appear in the label to assume the full responsibility of manufacture, of legal manufacture, let's say, while the other one will be like an actual manufacturer related with a specific agreement to the legal manufacturer, but at the end, the position of a legal manufacturer, as reflected in the label, must be assumed by only one person, legal or physical person. Yep. And of course, this is also related to the fact that we need to have a single CE marking, even if there are several legislation insisting on the same product. We need a single EU declaration of conformity with the different indications of the legislation they are complying with, and so on. So we need to have clear indications in the documents and in the label itself always to provide clear information to the user of the products, and of course to the national competent authorities in charge of market surveillance to follow up the product and, if necessary, to take action in case of problems.
Okay, thank you. And at the same time, you answered another question that was written: should we put 2 CE markings? So I hear you clearly say no, there's only 1 CE marking. And of course, in the declaration of conformity, you refer to the applicable legislation that you're compliant with. So in the declaration of conformity, both legislations are mentioned. Then I see another one concerning the publication in the official journal of harmonized standards. Or a remark is that on the PPE side, it has been more than a year that there was a publication of standards. In the meantime, many standards have been published at CEN level, and I know many of those have been proposed to the Commission for citation as harmonized. And the question is what to do in the meantime. Well, first of all, do you have an idea when there is a new update of the list expected? And second, what to do in the meantime? Some of the new standards are replacing previous versions of standards or previous standards that are more than 20 years old. So can you reply to that, please?
Yeah, sure. Of course, more details can be given by the colleagues dealing with the PPE, who are also in line today. But in general terms, this is a typical questions we always have to deal with. The publication in the official journal of harmonized standards is a bit complex process, because we have to do so as a Commission implementing decision. So when we receive proposals of harmonized standards from CEN and CENELEC, the Commission acts as soon as possible, first of all, to check whether the harmonized standards are fully in compliance and able to support the requirements of the applicable legislation. And then we proceed with the publication process, which is a bit long, maybe a bit longer than we would wish, but indeed we have to comply with the legal procedures because of the legal value of the references published in the official journal, while providing presumption of conformity. This can take some time, but you have to recall that this process is always a shared responsibility between the Commission and CEN and CENELEC. So the development of standards is also a lengthy process involving a lot of experts from the different DCs. So they are periodically submitted to the Commission for their assessment and then the publication if it is the case. And in the meantime, we are very well aware that we have a bit strange situation. For example, having already new versions of harmonized standards available on the market, so published by CEN and CENELEC, but not cited yet in the official journal because, for example, just because developing the development of the procedure for the assessment and the publication, or even in cases because there are some problem in these standards, so not making them not still suitable for publication. In the meantime, we can say that, of course, these last versions of harmonized standards can be regarded as standards reflecting the state of the art. So, in principle, it would be good to use them. But their use does not provide the presumption of conformity until these standards are referred to in the official journal. So we have to underline again, once more, that the use of standards in the European Union is generally voluntary. So a manufacturer can choose among harmonized standards published in the official journal, other harmonized standards, or even other kind of standards, including international standards. But when using standards which are not referred to in the official journal, the use of these standards does not confer presumption of conformity. So the manufacturer would need to demonstrate more in depth that the technical solutions they are using from other standards are suitable to comply with the legal requirements, which is a bit more complicated indeed than directly using harmonized standards cited in the official journal. In the Commission, in the different sectors, we are very aware of this question, of this problem, and we always make our best efforts to reduce as much as possible this time gap between the availability, the publication of standards by CEN and CENELEC and the publication of the references of these harmonized standards in the official journal to confer presumption of conformity. Because it will be very positive for everybody to have a clear set of harmonized standards in the official journal, representing indeed the very latest version of standards and the very latest state of the art. But indeed, about the timing for specific standards, you can address directly the colleagues in the PPE sector or myself to the page for medical devices to provide a bit more detailed information on specific cases.
Thank you, Mario. I'm going to take a few more of those questions that are very much linked to legislation or to the legal framework. One is also mentioning we have to work with standardization requests. There's one for medical device, there's one for the PPE. Would it be an idea to have a standardization request for the combination for the dual function products? Or how because yeah, if there's two separate mandates and you want to combine certain things in the standard, it might get a bit complicated. But I guess a combined standardization request might also be complicated. So do you have any thoughts on that, or is that one that, okay, we'll have to think about this one?
I can mention that the process, the legal basis for standardization requests is the standardization regulation 1025 of 2012, which governs the European standardization in the different aspects. So in principle, there is no problem. It will be no problem for the Commission to issue specific standardization requests covering a specific group of products, for example, dual-use products. In practice, I fully agree with you, Henk, it will be a bit complicated because such a standardization request should take into account the requirements of two legislations, so the two regulations on PPE and medical devices, and probably also some specific requirements for products. So in general terms, in a matter of principle, it will be possible to have such a common standardization request, and not as in the present time when we have separate standardization requests only for one legislation. So we can think about that, whether it will be convenient, I would say in parallel to the possible developments at standardization level in case of standards to be developed. For the time being, we can still have the situation of standards covering more than one legislative act, so making reference to different standardization requests. So then it would be not strictly necessary to have a common standardization request. But of course, it could be possible, and we can also think about that, whether it will be useful for the development of this work.
Okay, thank you. There's a few more, and I think a good part of those we can answer in writing. But because also looking at the time, or if we have time at the end of the seminar or of the workshop, we can take them then. As I said, there's quite some general ones. There's one question that was put also regarding sustainability, reusability, how to ensure that those are embedded in standards. I can assure you, and I think I can answer that, and Mario, feel free to complement or others in from the speakers. But on the PPE side, in the PPE sector forum, we have set up a task group on sustainability, and this also as a result of a workshop we had in March last year on sustainability for PPE. So we clearly saw a need to look into that. And with that task group, we are looking at different aspects of sustainability and seeing, okay, which ones are applicable to PPE or to certain types of PPE, and how can we guide and help the relevant working groups and technical committees on how to deal with those. So it's a work in progress. There's it's a very vast field and a lot of work to do, but it is certainly on the PPE field, it's in the works. And I'm sure on the healthcare side, they're doing something similar as well into making sure that these aspects are covered. Of course, never forgetting the primary function of the product, be it in the medical device, protect the patient or help the patient, and in the PPE field, protect the wearer of the product. I don't know, Mario, if you have something to add to this.
No, in principle, it's okay. I agree with you.
Okay, then I suggest that we go indeed to the next speaker. If you can move the slides, maybe. Okay, yep. So it's my pleasure to invite Giovanna Longo to give her presentation on her experiences and with some examples as well. Giovanna is chairing the technical committee 159, which is the hearing protectors, but she's also quite involved in other types of products. So interested to hear your presentation. Giovanna, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for having me here speaking about this very important topic. You know that I'm very often very passionate about this work, and I'm in standardization since I think now 22 years, and I've been working in different areas, starting from visibility, so visibility clothing, then moved to hearing protection, and but I am working in 3M, and I have a team of colleagues who are working also on respiratory protection, head protection, fall protection. So basically, for us at 3M, standardization is a very, very important part of our work, and we take it seriously, and we enjoy. And we also enjoy this kind of discussion also with the Commission. It's always good, also good to see the Commission at the PPE sector forum, where I joined since I am chair of TC 159. So what I'm going to speak about tonight, if I manage, yes, I managed to move the slides. So I'm starting to speak about respiratory protection. I have to say this is not my expertise, but somehow I feel everybody's getting expert of respiratory protection and FFP2 after the COVID. My knowledge is what I learned from the colleagues and the discussion in the last couple of years. And then I'm going to speak very briefly about the same topic on hearing protection. This is what I belong to. a consideration of eye protection, and very briefly on clothing. But the topic I'm going to speak about is mainly on respiratory protection. So, well, there's no way we can speak about respiratory protection now in 2022 without mentioning the pandemic. Respirator and mask were already present before, but at a certain point, all our world and all our life was kind of depending on how this virus was transmitted, how to protect ourselves, what are the best measures. And it was a joint effort of all the people working in this sector to solve it. And suddenly it was coming like the mask was the solution to all the problem, or at least would be, you know, in this situation, you always have some hope. And then suddenly everybody was speaking about a mask. What is a mask? And there was a lot of confusion. So I would like to first set a bit the situation, and I can only do it as I'm since 22 years in standardization. I can only do it by speaking about the FFP respirator drawn and designed according to the EN 149, and the surgical mask is drawn and designed according to the EN 14683. So of course, this is not saying much to the rest of the people who are not in detail knowledgeable about these topics, but I'm going to say a couple of words more on this, and this is going to help me also to discuss what is possible now and what is the development in the future of standardization. So we said, and Mario also correctly said, then the respirator, the PPE are there to protect the wearer. So here I have a kind of schematic design on how a mask or a respirator works. So you have the person wearing it, and the blue curved line should represent the mask or the respirator. Of course, it is very close to the face here. For drawing purposes, I put it a bit far away. And of course, this mask has to allow air coming in and out, because you want to breathe and you don't want to have a piece of plastic in front of your nose. So how does it work? The respirator, according to the EN 149, should protect the user from inhaling toxic particle or compounds. It could be biological, it could be any kind of pollutant and so on. And it is protecting because of the material of the respirator, but mainly it's the secret there is that when worn appropriately, there is no leakage inside the respirator. So inward leakage is tested very extensively. It's not an easy test on subjects, on 10 subjects. And at the same time, we know that a lot of countries like UK since several years, but also Italy and slowly other countries in Europe are asking for a fit testing, because this is really the clue of the respirator. Of course, it's important also the material and other things, but inward leakage is also an important topic. So then we go to the medical product. It's also a very important product because it's protecting the patient. So it's normally used by people in hospital, and it's always going the other way around. And basically, it is protecting the patient in case a doctor or a nurse is sneezing or coughing, so there is no body fluid going out and basically affecting the patient. And there is also, interesting enough, some protection against body fluid of the patient towards the wearer. The difference with the respirator is that a surgical mask is, I would say, comfortable, placed in front of the mouth and nose, but there are some leakage either on the side or around the nose, so it doesn't protect fully as the respirator against particle or viruses entering and reaching the respiratory tract of the user. So then, is it possible? It was always possible and has been already practiced in several years to have a double certification. So basically a product that is protecting the patient and is protecting the user, which is a kind of respirator according to the EN 149, and also fulfill the requirement of the EN 14683. There is one difference, a kind of concession of the 14683, that the differential pressure, so basically the breathability of the material, has to fulfill the respiratory standard and not the surgical mask standard. Otherwise, it would not be possible to apply and to certify. So this was always there since several years. There are some challenges because, you know, it's not only a question of taking two standards, certify, and that's it. You know, the medical device regulation requires much more according to the quality, according to the registration. And then we have to say also there is a difference in respiratory protection. You have a category 3 product, so you need to have the CE mark with the number of the notified body, and in the medical regulation, it is the surgical mask is class 1, so it's really low risk, it's understandable, and for its certification, self-certification from the manufacturer. I hear what Mario was saying, you only need to have one CE mark. I've been wondering if you have the MD symbol together with the number of notified body, if people would kind of be misled and believe that is not class 1 from the medical device, but that could be open for discussion. So this is what is happening already. And then, as I said, we had Corona and the situation was very much under stress. You know that there were not enough respirator, not enough masks, there was not enough of gowns, by the way, and a lot of other products. So there was a lot of discussion about, can we reuse the product? And also here, there are two words coming in contact. We know that hospitals very much aware on sterilization. They have a lot of experience in PPE. This is definitely not very much the case. But if you reuse a product that is single use, you end up in a completely different category in the medical direct regulation. And on the other side, from the PPE, if you do something with the product and you've been using it, are you sure that it's still working? So this situation, unfortunately, is now over, but you could see that two different ways of seeing a product were coming into a conflict, and where an understanding was not, was a common understanding was difficult to be taken. But now, due to this big problem, you know, from problem, normally human being is always able to learn and to look forward. And now there is a new direction. So I know that especially, I think it was started in Germany, a lot of discussion were happening and people were not happy about how the healthcare workers were protected. And they thought, okay, we need to rethink the complete approach. And then the work on the infection protective mask started. And this is Men at Work, so to speak. It is hosted by the CEN 205. And this is located in Working Group 17, Infection Protection Mask. And now there is a group of people at European level who are discussing. I know that there are a lot of discussion, and I think it's great to have experts from two different worlds getting together and exchanging point of view. And I think that is what is happening now. It's not an easy task. Good luck for the convener. But what they are trying to do, and of course, this is really early days. This is the idea, and you never know how things will develop. Is to have a product that is going probably to look like as a respirator, where there is the inward leakage is very minimum, but also the outward leakage. So you can imagine you have a person who might be affected by a pathogen, and then could still work even if he doesn't know. So he could still work with patient without the risk of infecting them. So we have inward leakage and outward leakage, at least in principle, as scope. Then there were a lot of discussion on wear time, how long can a product be worn. And then I think you saw it during the pandemic. Everybody was supposed to wear a mask or a respirator, and elderly people who had the lung function was not very, very strong, had really big problem to breathe through this mask. And so this is also to be taken care of. And the other point they want to take care, and this is also very challenging, children. I mean, during the pandemic, there were a lot of respirators for children, but a child is not a smaller version of an adult. It's a different physiological and anthropometric measures. And therefore, here it's great that there are medical doctors in the committee helping this. And by the way, also in hearing protection, we are planning to do something with children. So it's going to be very challenging and very interesting because of course, they have to be protected, but working with children, it's a bit more difficult. Okay, so this is what I wanted to say on respiratory protection. I want to mention one topic on hearing protection. You will not expect that there is so much in medical device and hearing protection, but if you have somebody who has wearing a hearing aid, what to do with this person if is working in a noisy environment? This is happening more and more, first because of the population growing older and working also in older age, but also because, luckily enough, there are methods with which people with hearing disability can do a complete normal life as it should be. So how do we do? And I know that in Germany, IFA, the institute, has been working on how to certify and how to deal with a combination of hearing aid and hearing protection. When you ask the question to Mario about what do we do with two manufacturers, you would have a manufacturer of hearing aid, a manufacturer of hearing protection. But I think it is clear that the responsibility has to be given to only one. And there is an approach on how to test this and how to deal with this. It could be a niche market, it could be, but I think it's important that people are asking themselves, and it can always be used, this. And as far as I learned from the expert, first you do all the testing and the checking as medical device, and on top you put the requirement of PPE. That was the approach. But there is a link, unfortunately, in German, in case you're interested. For eyewear, Henk already mentioned that. Protective eyewear are, as you know, tested and certified according to EN 166. But then, what happens if somebody wants to insert there some reader lenses? So it's magnifier glasses. Is this a medical device? Has to be considered as a medical device. And what if you have corrected lenses? I mean, and then the question is the manufacturer doing that, or is the end user going to the optician and changing this? And then who is the manufacturer there? I think it's an interesting question. Regarding a magnifier, I heard a notified body saying in a webinar that it is a PPE period, but I'm interested to hear more comment. And then, I mean, here I speak about protective clothing, I should say smart garment. There is a new standard on how to deal with garment with sensors, the EN 17673. It was a difficult work to be done. It has been finalized. So, and when you have a garment, and I know that firefighters have a lot of interest on this, when you have sensors that are measuring, for example, heartbeat, how do you deal with that? How do you certify? How do you work with that? I think it's a challenge from the firefighter point of view and from the decision making from one side, but also on the garment itself. So I just wanted to give some high-level information about possible. It's not only respirator, it's also other areas. So in my opinion, it would be great to have some guidelines on how to work. And I guess in the future, there will be also some more standard on these topics. And maybe also combination with other regulation, but this could be a topic for another workshop. Thank you, and I can pass it to the next speaker.
Thank you, Giovanna. Certainly some good examples, and you mentioned other regulations. Indeed, there are also other regulations that are applicable to products. Certainly good to see. I would suggest to give the floor to Sven now, and then take the questions that are more specific after both of your presentations, because I know Sven will mention a few things that you've already touched on as well, so it's better to take them together. For the audience, the Q&A, there's a lot going on there. There's already a lot of the questions also answered in writing in the Q&A. So if you see the box with the Q&A, you have the open ones and you have the answered. So you can also have a look at the answered. And again, these will be made available after the workshop together with the so that you can go through the material afterwards as well. With that, Sven Schoppe, chair of CEN 205, the non-active medical devices, which includes gloves, gowns, masks, and probably some other products as well. So thank you, Sven, for sharing with us your experiences and thoughts from that perspective. And then I will put you and Giovanna together and have you clash. No, I'm sure you won't clash, but yeah, interesting. So go ahead, Sven. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henk. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sven Schoppe from Germany, and I have the honor of being the chair of TC 205 within CEN. And I can only echo Giovanna's introduction, and I want to introduce to you the most wanted articles during COVID-19, along many others. And as you see on this photo, it has been mostly gowns and of course gloves and masks as well. And we all know the former situation of supply chains, which are on the better half now, but still are very weak and fragile. So these articles were used in hospital settings and settings outside the hospital, but mostly hospitals were requiring a lot of these articles. And I would like to ask you if you can spot the difference between these two articles, pretty much knowing that it will be very easy for you to spot the difference, because one of these articles is a medical device class 1, and one of these articles is a PPE product of the category 3. But we can be rather chilly with that, because we see that both of the regulations, both of the different regulations, actually give guidance on how to deal with the very same product, and not only the very same product group, but the very same article. In the medical device regulation, a medical and non-medical device must comply with both the requirements for medical devices and requirements for non-medical devices. So we see some guidance there, as well as in the PPE regulation, where it says where a PPE is subject to more than one Union Act requiring a declaration of conformity, a single declaration on conformity shall be drawn up in respect to all Union Acts. And let's look a little deeper in why that would be the case. So we see that, and I gave you here a picture of example of how these gowns can be used. And as the MDR, the medical device regulation, focuses on the patient protection, the view on the protection of surgeons or the operation teams, of course, takes a backseat, but by common sense, the barrier properties of the products used for also protecting the surgeon and operation team should be provided, vice versa, protecting the patient and protecting the healthcare worker. So the manufacturer would be, of course, allowed to identify those protective characteristics and the barrier properties and the protective characteristics of the complete product separately as a PPE product, but he then of course would have to document these properties, characteristics, and performances. He would have to document these and to declare them to be in conformity with the PPE regulation requirements. Having seen the, let's say, different approaches on one and the very same product to maybe two different regulations, let's have a look and a comparison on how a Class 1 medical device could be seen in safety proportions compared to a PPE product of Category 3. And we have to differentiate there between a reusable product and a single-use product, because there we have, as we already have heard by the panelists that spoke before me, a surgical gown would be a medical device of risk class 1 or 1 sterile. So there indeed would be the declaration of conformity possible in own responsibility, but only if the product is non-sterile. If in case of reusables, you would have a notified body for sterilization. And in addition, in Germany, if the gown is reusable, you need to declare the conformity of the reprocessing according to the Robert Koch Institute recommendations and requirements. They would require you to use a quality management system according to EN ISO 13485. And if the product is reusable, in conjunction with a European standard code 14065, that is for process validation and risk analysis of biocontamination control. So again, we would have for a reusable product that would serve the already mentioned aspects of sustainability as well. We have the PPE requirements. It would, according to the general interpretation, it would be a Category 3 PPE. With then, of course, the modules C2 or D for type examination and production support or quality monitoring and product monitoring. And of course, there we would have the 4-digit reference CE number of the notified body. So again, there at least there would be the same quality approach if it is a reusable product against a PPE product. If the manufacturer now of the reusable gown would have done and conducted all the assessment required for quality control as for his Class 1 medical device, then most of the times the manufacturer would have to claim conformity to the PPE regulation on a second path, because again, this is for Germany. I'm not sure about the other European countries. But in Germany, we have a second surveillance authority coming into play, which would be the Zentralstelle der Länder für Gesundheit for the medical device and the Zentralstelle der Länder für Sicherheit for the PPE product. And often also a second notified body would be required, and that might be a special European situation, but we do have a lot of different notified bodies for both product groups, medical devices and PPE, and we have only a very small overlap. These are, again, this is data distilled for Germany. There is, of course, more notified bodies in Europe and more notified bodies for both product groups in Europe. But as you see, we have only a very small overlap for notified bodies. So actually, the manufacturer of a medical device class 1, taken into account it would be reusable, would often have to search for a second notified body, because his notified body for the medical device would often not be accredited for looking at PPE aspects. Looking a little more into standards for both different product. For the surgical gown, it would be the before mentioned EN 13795. Used to be a harmonized standard, now is in the standardization request for medical devices according to the medical device regulations. And EN 13795 that has been that is in the work plan of CEN 205 WG14, working group 14. Differentiates between two performance levels, and that would one be the standard performance level for smaller and dry operations, and the high performance level for the acceptance for longer duration of operations with a lot more fluids coming into play. EN 13795 has defined specific test methods and has defined performance values, and the manufacturer would have to declare material certifications from accredited testing institutes for that standards, and of course with notified bodies for that product group, and here of course would have to supply a technical documentation. Within the product group of PPE, we would most likely have the European standard 14126, which again was a harmonized standard in the official journal under the or is a harmonized standard in the PPE regulation, latest version from 2003 with corrections in 2004. This standard for sometimes the very same products has a 5 or 6 class graduation, of course underlined with specific test methods, often with different performance values within those test methods and the graduation between the performance classes. And there again, the manufacturer would need to supply certifications for his materials. He would have to pull testing institutes accredited to this to the standards, and of course here he would have to choose the appropriate notified bodies, and often the technical documentation would look different than the one for medical devices. So again here the manufacturer would have to deal with two paths of certification, accreditation, and declaring conformity to standards for one and the very same product. So let's have a quick look into the standard 14126 together with EN 13795. Both were declared as essential in the fight of COVID during 2019, 20, 21, and 22. EN 14126 is a standard that has a very broad range of application, and historically let's say the current version from 2003 and 2004, which is already nearly 20 years old now, the title is Protective Clothing Performance Requirements and Test Methods for Protective Clothing Against Infective Agents. And traditionally, this standard used to combine performance requirements against, let's say, chemical agents or chemical hazards, and against biological and infective agents. This standard, 14126, is currently under revision within ISO TC 94 Subcommittee 13 Working Group 6. And the name of the successor standard will be ISO 22615. And just for your information, Working Group 6, in Working Group 6, work remit is also, and work plan is also the international equivalent for the standard 13795. And that will be the ISO project 20384. So this standard is currently under revision. The successor standard is currently under construction, and you don't find in the list of harmonized standards or the standardization requests, funny enough, you don't find any cross-referencing of EN 13795 as a medical device in the PPE harmonized standard list or standardization request, or 14126 in the medical device. So there is no cross-referencing. This seems to be a European issue and challenge, because in most parts of the world you don't have that strict differentiation, and you talk about protective apparel in a more broader approach, a broader term. So Working Group 6 has noticed this need of integrating a European perspective into this worldwide standard application, and Working Group 6 and Subcommittee 13 met just last week in Switzerland in winter tour, discussing long range about bringing in a differentiation, giving more headroom and space to manufacturers only wanting to claim conformity to certain, let's say, agent groups, what we just had in 14126 with a broad range of application. So if there is manufacturers only wanting to claim conformity to like biological agents, infective biological agents, which would be the main application for hospital as well. So Working Group 6 is thinking about how to integrate this way of thinking, this way of choosing your performance requirements, your performance characteristics in ISO 22615 to give you more space of making your products conform with this worldwide applicated standard 22615. Of course, in the world of standardization, we can only, let's say, with those standards, pave the ground for respecting a broader range or a dual-use approach on products. But of course, standardization bodies and Commission have to help. So some kind of guideline on a vice versa acceptance for successfully conducted conformity assessments could be very helpful from the Commission, because currently those dual-use products are on, let's say, some kind of a slippery ground, and we have seen that during COVID-19 pandemic response times, where the demand for protective gowns grew rapidly, and we had those mixed settings where medical devices were used in the PPE settings, leaving the users or leaving the administrative people with a not always apparent or approved conformity situation. And the same thing, as Giovanna just explained, the same thing with medical masks according to 14683 or protective masks according to EN 149. And as Giovanna has already also stated, TC 205 has realized this issue, and TC 205, respecting a German initiative, set up the Working Group 17, which is currently in the phase of defining performance requirements for infection prevention masks, giving more safety to users and purchasers within hospitals to choose the right and conforming products. One thing we have not talked about this much is gloves, but there, of course, could be the situation as well. We have masks for medical use in 455, covered in 455, and we would have other requirements with gloves that have contact with food instead of with patients. So we have different regulations there, and things need to be talked about as well. So to tackle the obstacles, the existing obstacles, it should be that the existing hurdles, either of a mutual or vice versa recognition of existing accreditations from either medical device or the PPE sector, those hurdles should be removed. So there should be a more harmonized or a mutual approach. But I think this can only be done not only by the standardization bodies, but DG GROW and DG Santé should be included in that. And maybe this cooperation could be fixed in guidelines on the issue for dual-use products. And it must become easier to develop these products for manufacturers with combined functionality, that is dual-use functionality, and maybe to go through combined conformity assessment procedures to, again, ensure the safety approaches of both regulations. But currently, it is that double documentation and certification costs for very price-sensitive products nearly half the market opportunities for dual-use products. And I think standardization bodies and the Commission are very much aware of that, as we have heard in the morning. And I think we are on a good path on solving these existing challenges. Thank you very much. Henk?
Thank you, Sven. Sorry, I was looking for the, I was starting to talk and then I realized I was on mute. So, thank you, Sven, for your presentation. Certainly good to also see some of your views. I suggest we take a few questions directly linked with the presentation of Giovanna and Sven before having a short coffee break and then listening to statements of several of the participants. And again, I can tell you our speakers have been very, very active in answering already questions in writing in the Q&A. So there's already a good part in the answered tab of the Q&A. But anyway, I'll start with one of the last that I see, but that doesn't mean that the previous ones are forgotten. A last one is directly linked with Sven. You mentioned things that are happening in Germany, and shouldn't it be that there is a single market? We already have enough things that are differently in different countries. I see the 3-man logo on packaging is mentioned. That's a classical one in the meantime. But yeah, any response, any view on that? And I see that you've already answered in writing even, so I don't see the question anymore before me. So Sven, please, and maybe Mario can complete at some point as well.
It is certainly that we have some German specialities within the EU legislation, but I just couldn't agree more that this should be a common base of requirements and a common base of declaring conformity. Absolutely, yes, but this might be a long way. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I think one of the or something you mentioned, indeed, there's differences or there are different technical committees in the standardization. There's DG GROW, DG Santé, but let's not forget, indeed, there's with the notified bodies, there's not that many that cover both legislations.
Yes.
But let's not also forget that when we look at market surveillance, in the member states. One, it's already a responsibility of the member state, which creates differences and different interpretations and approaches in different member states. But two, if we talk about medical device and we talk about PPE, in most countries, if not in all countries, the market surveillance authorities is not the same. So that's another element that we need to take into consideration at some point, because that if market surveillance is completely different and looking at the things differently, that's going to create also issues. So we really need to look at the whole cycle and the whole system, and not just parts, even if here we're talking mainly about standardization.
Yeah.
But again, we cannot cut it and put it in a separate box. Standardization is one box, market is another, market surveillance legislation is another box. No, it's all one world that we need to work together. So so that's one thing. Okay, there is a specific question. I'm now going to the oldest ones, and that's more related to Giovanna, I think. In some hospitals, there were problems with the way the valve, the exhalation valve, is mounted on the respirator. So the question is that something that should be taken into account in, I would say, a revision of the standard, or is that already, to your knowledge, taken into account, and the person asking the question is ready to further explain? Right? I guess if you can answer in general, and then maybe it's something to have a one-on-one at a later stage on that. And certainly interesting to see experiences, by the way.
Yes, I mean, it's looking like it's a very detailed question. In generally speaking, with the COVID, there have been a modified way of seeing things, and among those also the valve. The valve is normally there to improve the breathing of the wearer, so to make it more comfortable. But of course, in the COVID age, was creating some problems. I don't know if there, because as I've said at the beginning, I'm not personally involved in respiratory protection. So I don't know. I know that a lot of discussion and a lot of things came out, but I don't know if there was something, and there is something working and discussing on the valve. I know that the EN 149 just started the revision. I mean, at least the first discussion started a couple of weeks ago. So maybe this is one point to bring up. Otherwise, I'm happy to put him in contact with an expert. I don't want to say something I'm not aware of. But of course, I mean, every kind of field experience are always very welcome. And actually, you know, everybody is very welcome to join and participate in this very open technical discussion, because we can learn every day from end user. And actually, there's never enough end user. There are a lot of manufacturer and notified body. Sometimes we miss this kind of practical knowledge. So it's always good to have this practical knowledge represented also. Okay. I don't know if I answered the question.
I would say so, and thank you, Giovanna, and also thank you for pointing out the need to have users in standardization of products, and certainly the experiences of users with products, and because that's the way standards can also be improved, in knowing more about what they experience and how they use the products in real life. And I know manufacturers and notified bodies are supposed to know that, but they can't know everything, of course. So thank you for pointing that out. Then I also see a question, comment related to also synergies with other technical committees, like, for instance, the technical committee 391, which is societal and citizen security, which has different working groups. One certainly being healthcare facilities and managing security in healthcare facilities, where they also develop some documents. And would it be valuable to have a cooperation there? if I can answer, and then Sven and Giovanna, please jump in. I'll start with giving a bit of my views on that. In my view, there's never enough cooperation. That's clear, and we need to know from each other what we are doing and making sure that there is a harmonized, a coordinated approach to things, because the last thing we want is to confuse the market with different standards that are similar but not exactly the same, or worst case even contradicting. So that's one thing. Second thing that I want to mention is that there is also a sector forum security, and I'm sure and I know that TC 391 is part of that sector forum. There is already a link between the PPE sector forum and the security sector forum. And I know for the simple reason, because as chair of the sector forum for PPE, I'm a member of the security sector forum, so I know there is this link, and we know what we're doing from each other. There's very little PPE connections or product connections. They're talking a lot about the security of buildings, of machines, and so on. So, but still, it's good to know from each other. I cannot speak on behalf of the healthcare sector if there's also the link from there, but it's definitely something that has an interest from our side. But I don't know, Sven and Giovanna, if you want to add something to this.
Well, the only thing I would add is if there is some work in progress that is interesting for both parties, there could be always a liaison with the working group or with the TC. But then if you say that there is not much about PPE, I'm not sure. But, you know, this way can always be, you know, receiving documents and sharing documents. It's always possible, I would say.
Okay, thank you. And I don't know, Sven, if from the, or somebody else from the healthcare sector, if you're aware of cooperation from your side as well with this TC?
I can only echo that. As TC 205 chair, I can say, at least not to my knowledge, that there is a cooperation or liaison with TC 391. But Katerini mentioned a lot of interesting topics that could be included in let's say, at least having a look at that if work programs fit with standards being developed in TC 205. But again, bear with me, I don't think we do have current liaisons or activities cooperating with TC 391, so that would be an interesting thing I would like to share with the secretary.
Okay, thank you. Then I see a comment where one should not forget that the protection that is provided for medical devices is inside out, while for PPE it's outside in. Therefore, the testing is going to be different as the risks are different. Therefore, levels can be different as the risk may be different. But when we're talking about open wounds versus skin, healthy persons versus unhealthy patient, and so on. So the statement is the standard should all those things take also into account, obviously. So thank you, Eric, for that comment, certainly valuable.
Yes, yes, that's very true.
Okay, and yeah, I also see a comment. There's also, when we're talking about masks, there is indeed also a, at the moment, technical specification 17553 on community face coverings, which are not PPE and not medical device. There's the comment that in those cases, valves are not allowed, which makes sense because you don't typically probably don't need valves neither, because they are supposed to help you in exhalation, which you don't need if the material that is in front of the mouth is open or breathable enough. There is a question, and I see Mario is already typing an answer, but it might be worth mentioning it to the whole group. Also in speech, can the same standard be harmonized under both PPE and medical device regulations? If so, the conception of the standard may need to be adapted. So Mario, if you can maybe answer that. I know you're typing the answer.
Oh, yes, okay, thank you. So just saving typing. Yes, in principle, to say that in principle, a standard, harmonized standard can include different and several annexes said. You know, annex said is this part of the harmonized standard indicating which requirements are covered by the harmonized standards of which legislation. So indeed, we can have different standardization requests. We can ask CEN and CENELEC to develop a standard covering one legislation, for example, the VP regulation, and also covering some parts of the medical devices regulation, and vice versa. So it is possible that a single harmonized standards can include clauses referred to different requirements of different legislations, and then the standard would contain several annexes said A, said B, etc., declaring that specific clauses of the standard are covering a number of requirements of the legislation. This is the case, for example, very common in the medical devices sector. You know that we have two regulations, the regulation 745 for medical devices and the 746 for in vitro diagnostic medical devices. There are several standards that cover both regulations, typically the standard on risk management or on quality management systems. So if you take the standard 13845 on quality management, you will see that it includes two annexes said, one covering the requirements of the medical devices regulation and the other covering the in vitro diagnostic medical devices regulation. This is a common case for this sector. In the future, if we agree on the convenience to have, for example, a single standard, a single harmonized standards covering face masks, covering both the requirements under the PP regulations, so for face mask providing protection to the user, to the wearer, and covering also face mask providing protection to the patients, so to the people outside the wearer, let's say. It could be possible, indeed, such a standard would include at least two annexes said. The first one would explicit the requirements of the PP regulation covered by the standard, and the other annex said would explicit the requirements or the clauses of the standard covering the requirements of the medical devices regulation. Of course, as said before, in general terms, this would require a quite complex work, but if we can recognize that such a single standard would help users, manufacturers, notified bodies to carry out their work, it could be interesting to develop such a standard. But we are still in a very first stage, but we are going to think about it. Just to confirm, in principle, we can have multiple annexes said in the same standard.
And Mario, may I ask a question from the panel? Sorry,
yes.
Maybe I'm not supposed to. But does it mean that there are two HAS consultants involved?
Yes, good questions indeed, because you know that we have different HAS consultants under different legislation. In such a case, when a standard covers more than one legislation, it is required the cooperation of more than one HAS consultant, indeed.
So you would have when you ask, you have to have parallel vote from the two different health consultants. Okay, good luck.
Yes, no, okay, the parallel vote will be in the rather in the TC developing the standard. For the HAS consultant, indeed, we need to coordinate their work and also the commission services involved. You know that PP regulation is under the DG GROW and the medical devices under DG SANTE. I can confirm that indeed we have a very good and continuous cooperation with the colleagues in the two different services, and in such a case we will work directly together to ensure that the work of the HAS consultants is the correct one, and then of course to provide the final assessment whether the final standard will be able to be cited in the official journal under one or both legislations.
Doesn't sound very easy, but I see that we are trying to make an effort.
No, indeed, it's easy to say, but in practice it is difficult. But again, I think we have also to consider to the benefits of such an effort, whether such an effort will be really useful for the final users. If the result could be even the same or more confusion than the present time, maybe it will not be really worth to work with it. We have to, this workshop indeed is useful for this also, to collect ideas and comments from the interested people, whether we will be useful to continue with this initiative.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this. I think we had the most pressing questions so far. And looking at the timetable, we're 5 minutes behind the original time schedule, which is a big success, I think, to be honest. Also, looking at the number of questions we already treated. So I would suggest to have a 10-minute break now and start again at 11:25. So a bit under 10 minutes. So see you in 10 minutes. Thank you. I hope everybody is back and we can start with the second part of the workshop. If I may have the next slide, Nele. Okay, so as we did at the beginning, we have a poll question, a simple question, listening to all the discussions we had. What would your preferred outcome be for European standardization? And you can choose only one. Either integrated standards, which can be used to meet both medical device and PPE, keep the standards separate, or it would depend on the dual-use product. I see there's already a good number of people answering the poll. I'll give it a little bit more time as long as responses continue to arrive. Okay, I think that the trends is not changing. We can keep the poll open for another couple of minutes just to allow everybody to answer that did not yet do it. But if I look at the results we have at the moment, it's more or less a neck and neck race between integrated standards, or it would depend on the dual use products. Only 10% gives as answer keep the PPE and medical device standards separate. So that's a pretty clear indication of what you feel about that. Thank you for that. Next slide, Els. Thank you.
It's Nele sharing the slides, so I cannot do anything
sorry,
for that.
Nele. Oh, I'm getting confused. Sorry for that. Okay, so now we have statements. There's 5 names on the list. If there's anybody else with burning things, we can look at that after that. We have asked everybody to limit your statements to 3, absolute maximum 4 minutes. So I hope you will keep to that. We will start with Omar. Omar, please. The floor is yours.
Hello, Henk. Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. My name is Omar Daher from SME Safety, an association representing PPE manufacturers, but representing small business standards today. And thank you for this interesting and important event, tackling the dual use, which is of course important for us as an SME organization. That we would like to point out the degree of complexity on SMEs for this topic, and I would also I agree to the degree, Henk, when you mentioned the surveillance authorities, because this is also as part of the system is an area where we need to discuss and to come to some sort of a convergence system if possible, or at least some close system to that, in order to really integrate and have a real single market. Because going back to the COVID, we've learned a lot that it is actually you can fix something from one part, which is the standard or the conformity assessment, but then on reality things can go wrong. So we need to look at the whole system. But I would also like to grab your attention to another layer, I would say, of usage now that is kicking in with the European Commission plan for the digital transformation and the green transition, which is the twin transition, which is another layer of use. That is, for example, we have now manufacturers producing FFP masks that have now smart chips, and these smart chips are connected to the internet. So they are now being recognized as an IoT device, Internet of Things device, and they should be also declared under the conformity assessment of the IoT standards, in addition to the radio equipment directive, because they are now connected to the internet. And these masks can be very useful to, for example, track usage and make sure that your employees, for example, are using the masks to their maximum duration and not beyond. So from that point, it is another layer of complexity. It is another layer of cost that needs also a close cooperation between SMEs and the PPE and medical device with SMEs or companies in the digital world. And for that particular point, we are tackling this issue with the SPS PPE Forum on the 19th of October, which is called From Dual Use to the Multi-Use. And we are tackling the issue of conformity assessment for digital and also for the eco-design. And if you agree, Henk, I will paste the link to the registration in the question and answer area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Omar. And yes, I don't see a problem that you paste the link for your event in the Q&A, if it's indeed open for everybody to attend. I don't see an issue with that. Next on our list is Pavel Horsky. If you can be unmuted and give us your statements.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'm on the line or not?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I've prepared only short few comments regarding double or cross certification, regarding maybe and pros and cons, because I fully agree that for many of producers could be definitely easier and better to have one set of requirements, but it is from my side a bit dangerous, because times to times maybe in different way. So it's I would like to say about harmonization of both directives, because I know from different examples, different directives or regulations, that the committee can not prolong harmonization for many standards. In case of lack of harmonization, it is very hard to process this cross certification. So it is for me, it is the most important thing. So I think that it is briefly the most important part. Sorry, because for my not a bit chaotic speech, because I'm on in my car. So it's what next?
Okay, thank you for this.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Alexis Percival. Alexis is.
Hello.
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Alexis Percival. I'm based in the UK and I work for the Yorkshire Ambulance Service. I'm here representing ECOS, and we're looking to see what we can do in order to integrate sustainability and the green agenda into all PPE across the board. We've had within the UK a lot of experience, obviously, of the pandemic, as everybody else has, but PPE was something that within the sustainability world hadn't really featured until the pandemic. And during the pandemic, obviously, because many didn't have the availability of PPE and the appropriate medical devices, we had to look at very different strategies. So a lot of the integration of gowns, looking at reusable curtains, reusable face masks, goggles, lots of different things came out of the need for it, but also not having the availability. So within the UK, we've looked at a lot of different alternatives and what we can do in order to integrate that into everything that we're doing. But also we're looking at the sustainability, the circularity, having a circular economy that's embedded in it, and not being reliant on products that are shipped halfway across the world, but having a much better standard that we can look at across the board. So I'm really keen to get involved in this particular stream of work, but also looking at anything else that looks at what we can do to ensure that we have circular economy embedded, that we have standards that ensure that we have reuse, recyclability. We've churned through 3.6 billion type 2R face masks in the UK during the pandemic. The previous year, we used around 200 million. So when you start looking at the total number that we've consumed, it has a massive impact if we get this very wrong. And as we move to net zero agendas, it's really, really key that we get these standards embedded. So yeah, I'm keen to get involved in anything and anywhere that we can kind of change the direction of standards that ensure that we get reusability, circular economy, and a net zero type of product in place across the board for anything that is applicable, obviously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexis. Did I understand correctly in the beginning that you represent ECOS?
Yes.
Okay, then I can confirm to you that in the task group sustainability of the PPE sector forum, ECOS is represented by Valeria.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
So there is already a link, because we do see that one, ECOS has good knowledge, but it's also important to communicate. So that's already covered. So maybe you can talk to Valeria on how you can also get involved or whatever. But there is the link already made.
Perfect. That's fine. That's fine.
That's reassuring, I hope, a little bit to you. Okay, and then next for the statement is Ekaterini Pusturli, if that sounds more or less correct, and you have a few slides, so go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Hank. First of all, I would like to say congrats to all the speakers for the insightful presentations. We learned a lot, and thank you for having me. So we live in a complex and interdependent world that deals with unprecedented challenges and crises, like the pandemic, which requires solidarity, togetherness, prevention, preparedness, response and recovery, and efficiency, especially in sectors like the healthcare. Europe has shielded with a plethora of proper legislation, regulations, and standards in order to produce added value products with high quality and safety. Taking into account the lessons learned by the COVID-19 pandemic, have been understood that specific categories of dual-use products can ensure safety and security at their operation and usage. Medical devices and personal protective equipment are such type of products, which are widely used in the healthcare infrastructures and services by health professionals and also by first responders in search and rescue operations, in civil protection, and in humanitarian aid, among others. We understand that such products can protect the wearer from health and safety risks and also can protect patients at high risk of infection. Examples of such products are surgical gloves, face masks, protective glasses and visors, smart PPE, smart MD. Medical devices guarantee the protection of the patient and should only be used and indicated by the manufacturer who defines its intended use. Also, in this case, authorized bodies have to bear with many challenges as the precise list of dual-use products, the guidance and updates in legislation and legislative documents, joint technical committees, new or revised standards, establishment of liaisons, etc. I'm referring to these issues because I'm talking under my hat as a standardization expert and advisor in technical committees and workshop agreements of many Horizon 2020 projects in the fields of disaster resilience and also e-health. So I consider that there is not only room but need for synergies among relevant actors, since biosafety and biosecurity aspects and impacts urgently emerged during the pandemic, simultaneously with the sustainability and digitalization, meaning intelligent medical devices dimensions as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ekaterini, for this insight. Okay, and then the next, and now I'm a little bit confused or not. I see on the slide area, and I see
Anna presenting.
Sorry?
It will be Anna presenting in name
but
of...
I saw indeed on the other slide Anna. So Anna will present prepared in cooperation with area, if I understand correctly. So Anna, please.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, no problem.
Yes. Okay, good. So, hello everyone. My name is Anna Ruhala and I represent SGS FIMCO, a notified body. And my colleague Erja Mäkelä from Finnish Institute of Occupational Health was unable to join. So I promised to speak on her behalf. She has prepared a bit more a practical slide set presenting a one proposal on how to move forward with isolation gowns and aprons. And you can go ahead to the next slide. Yeah, so the proposal that Erja has prepared is focusing on possibilities for choosing between different properties, that they are minimized for isolation gowns and aprons. This would be when we are facing a similar situation that we did with COVID. So have a specific solution prepared for similar situations. So the models would be gowns to be open from backside, tied from backside, not possible to tie from front side. And aprons with sleeves, the same properties, but the hems do not overlap. And if we go to the next slide, this is a test set that Erja is proposing that could be used for these type of products, where the required tests are a bit minimized from the normal requirements that are used for these type of products when they are treated as PPE or as medical devices. So here is a set of five different tests that she's suggesting for these type of products. Yeah, this is a bit more practical view during this seminar, and I think this could be something that could be taken into account in the working groups which are working on finding solutions for the questions that we've seen today.
Okay, thank you, Anna, for sharing this with us. And I think indeed it's important to share that with the relevant technical committee and working group as well. But it shows that indeed it's good to have ideas about solutions. It's not only problems, and I'm glad to see that there are people with proposals and not only stating problems, and not saying that everybody else was only stating problems, by the way.
If I may jump in there,
sure.
This is highly appreciated. Thank you, Anna. And together with the project lead for 22615, which is the successor of 14126, or with the 13795 or the ISO equivalent 2384, it will be my pleasure if, like, you would share your thoughts in one of those upcoming meetings to be, let's say, inserted into the further work plan of both standards. So if you, like from the Finnish side, would be able and willing to share your thoughts there, I think it would be highly appreciated. And as Hank said, because it's a practical approach to solving issues and creating products serving both intended users. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sven. I'll forward your comments to Erja. She's more of an expert in this area than I myself am.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sven. Unless there's someone else that indicated that they might want to make a statement here, we can continue with Q&A. Let me see what we already have, and please let me remind you that you can use the Q&A panel to submit your questions. Don't hesitate. Well, you haven't hesitated so far, so please continue to do that. What I'm seeing here in the open questions seems to have been already covered. Maybe one element that I want to throw also in the room, especially with the speakers we had. It was I saw in one of the comments or questions also the reference to taking into account gender into standardization, and then definitely looking at masks and other types of products where indeed when there is a close or tight fitting necessary, then well, gender is not necessarily the defining, but differences in shapes and sizes and so on, or the defining part. So I don't know if you can comment on that. And then indeed, I see colleagues in the chat telling me that I cannot forget Alison Siret, which I will not do. So if you can first respond to the gender issue, and then we give the floor to Alison, who also wanted to make some statements. Thank you.
Shall I answer something about this? I mean, there is. It's an important topic because it's important that the garment is not, or the PPE is not done based on the typical white male, which is probably not existing anywhere. Therefore, I think I was writing something on the chat regarding the anthropometric shapes and the table that is reported in the testing for inguar leakage. So you choose in a panel of 10 people and you have to report the size and I think this kind of deciding the size of the face. But I think the important part in this case is also to test the product on the person who is really using. I mean that the test is done only on 10 people, and it's also difficult in those shapes. You have three-dimensional characteristics. You cannot say, middle Italian women shape. There's nothing something like that. So you have 3 different characteristics, and it's very difficult to give a size, like small, medium, large, male, female, northern country, southern country, Asian face. There are some references, but at the end of the day, I think the best would be to test. As you wear a pair of trousers, you have to wear a pair of trousers, and they have to be fitting. And the same goes for a respirator. They have to be fitting on the person who is going to use it. So think that would solve the problem, anthropometric, and at the end of the day. And you will find some products that are not fitting all the faces, which is perfectly normal. And that's the point.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if Sven, you also want to add something on that?
I think I wouldn't be able to add more than Giovanna already did concerning TC205 or the question of gowns and masks.
Okay, thank you. So then, and again, apologies, it came in quite late, but that doesn't mean we should forget you, Alison. So please, if you want to make your statement.
Yes, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, good. Sorry, I should have sent a question in the chat rather than email earlier. But shall I go to statement number 2, perhaps, Henk, because the first one is a little bit off topic.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I made the following statement, which I will read. First of all, I said the plethora of national and regional PPE and medical device product standards, certification requirements, if any, and QMS options globally is a cause for significant delay to the WHO or the OMS publication of minimum PPE product specifications versus the specific infective agent risk by exposure type, demonstrated during the Ebola epidemic and the COVID-19 pandemic. So many standards to get through and compare and identify which standard is equivalent to the other. It delays the process of coming up with minimum product standards for PPE/medical devices in pandemics. The second issue, also linked to the plethora of standards, certification and QMS options globally, it creates major barriers to the supply of conforming and well-made high-quality PPE between geographical regions. As an example, take a simple case, because we saw the COVID-19 was a very chaotic supply situation. Go back to Ebola in 2015. Global manufacturing capacity can be ramped up, but not all locations are making the right product that's CE certified, that is legal to be brought into the EU. So in Ebola's case, let's say a product that's not CE certified could be shipped to Africa where it's needed. However, being ethical, and the purchasers actually say, well, is it CE certified? Does it meet such and such standard? You can get around it, but it's difficult. So there are supply barriers because of the plethora of national standards. So a harmonized approach, which would go beyond just the EU single market, would be very beneficial. That would help solve supply issues ultimately globally, moving capacity from one place to the other. So I really enjoyed Mr. Schopper's conclusion, which was very eloquent, saying, you know, the double documentation and the certification, including QMS, creates costs for manufacturers and reduces market opportunities. But even if this could be improved, the current medical device PPE issue could be improved and these challenges reduced, it's not necessarily going to solve the major supply issues we see during the pandemic. So I put that out there. I don't know if people have got other comments to that or more insight, but it's just something that strikes me that we had major supply, and I'm not sure the harmonized approach will go far enough, even though it's an improvement.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that statement, and I would say definitely valuable, and I think everybody dreams about, or a lot of people dream about global standards, the same for everybody all over the world. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of political issues behind that we certainly cannot solve within the standardization committees. There's indeed also the issue of the legislation that is completely different, and you don't even need to have a combination PPE and medical device to have completely different legislation and certification systems, just look at PPE on itself and compare what's happening in the US and what's happening in the EU, and you already have a completely different system. And certainly when it comes to legislation, it's a political issue. Standards cannot help that. But fully agree that it would be very beneficial, and that doesn't mean that we should not continue to work and to try to come to more harmonization and as high level as possible on everything. I don't know if anybody from the speakers wants also to add something to this last statement, and I know there's also in the chat and in questions received before, there also has been some link or comments or questions concerning the global approach, the ISO standardization versus pure EN and even beyond. So please, Mario, Sven, Giovanna, if you have anything to add or your thoughts on this.
Shall I start?
Go ahead, Giovanna.
So I think I would respond in 2 words: communication, communication, communication. I think if during the pandemic, everybody was sitting on at the same table and discuss, because probably we as a standard developer have a kind of idea of what we are doing, and we know how to navigate all these difficult standards. It is difficult, I agree and I admit it. But I think if you speak with standardization people, they kind of know what they are doing. What we don't know is what the WHO is doing. So it took a lot of time before the WHO finally came out with, and I mean, should not be a criticism, but how is the disease transmitted? And if you know how the disease is transmitted, you can also know what kind of PPE to be used. So it's a kind of common discussion, working together. And yes, you're right, in each different countries of the world and around the world, around the globe, there are different standards. This was not making things easy. But I tell you, it's a challenge to write ISO standard. We do it, we are happy to do it, we learn quite a lot, but it's a challenge and it's not something that is happening overnight. Plus, we have to say that once we have the ISO standard in Europe, we have to harmonize them, which is, I can tell you, not easy. In the US, are they using them? Are they not using? Well, you know what the answer. And in other countries. So it's what we are striving for. This is what we want to do. Come and help. Come and see. We are happy of anybody. There are always less people working in standardization, doing that in their kind of free time, working, dedicating time to that, and doing because they believe there is a purpose for that. Yes, let's communicate and work together. And I think you're right, but we are on the way. So, and we want that, honestly.
Thank you, Giovanna. Sven or Mario, something to add to this?
I could add to Giovanna's communication, I could add cooperation. Most of you know that I'm an active supporter of the European voice in standardization and the European voice in international standardization. But the more and more I get involved in ISO standardization, I see the need for cooperation between CEN and ISO, because sometimes, and as we have dealt with today, we make it pretty hard and tough for ourselves, even within Europe, for making use of product possibilities when claiming conformity to those products. And sometimes we could learn about the approach we take in other countries and could integrate these thoughts in a, let's say, more open kind of standardization that allows products to be used in either a dual or, as Omar said, in a multiple way. And that we're just in the beginning of that on that road, and we just start to walk towards those common targets and aims. But I'm pretty sure that from the standardization bodies, as well as from the Commission side, a lot of people have listened very closely today to make or to build the help that is needed for manufacturers to provide safe and usable products. And I'm pretty sure Mario will echo on that. Thank you very much.
Yes, indeed. Thanks a lot, Sven and Giovanna. I fully agree with you. I would like just to add, maybe especially from the perspectives of medical devices, the relationship between standardization, international standardization, and European standardization is not an easy one, because we know very well that at ISO-IC, different regions, different countries participate, and it is not possible, let's say, to impose regulatory requirements from one side on the others, but they try to make a synthesis, an harmonization at international level, taking into account all the different inputs. So sometimes international developed standards are not directly applicable in Europe, or they would need to be adapted, especially by an appropriate Annex Z to define which requirements are fully able to support European legislation and which not. The Commission indeed is working a lot in this international regulatory convergence, cooperating with CEN and CENELEC, and also in fora, enlarged fora with ISO and IC. We are also in dialogue, regulatory dialogue with different key partners worldwide, including United States, including Australia, Switzerland, the UK, and so on. And also in the medical device sector, you know that there is the International Medical Device Regulatory Forum, which is participated by the main countries and regions in the world, including the European Commission, European Union, and in particular the European Union will take the chairpersonship of this group next year, 23. Colleagues are directly working with it. And standardization is one of the main aspects, the main topics of work also in this forum. So it's a continuous work, it's a continuous process, but we are very active on it. And indeed, the key terms are communication, participation, transparency, and work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario, for those comments as well, and as well Sven and Giovanna. I think it's clear there's awareness of the international angle, and it would have benefit. The practical side is maybe something different, but it's good that everybody's aware and working on that. I'm looking at the Q&A and I see there's again a list of those. There's some comments that already have been addressed more or less. I see Pete shared a link to a document or a specification for thumb loop gowns, which are similar to isolation gowns, that was prepared in the UK. So I guess that is also an input to the CEN standardizing committees. So thank you for that. I see another comment or question, again related to sustainability and definitely also a difficult one. Is it worth looking at particulate matter and microplastic as well as coating release into washing waters to decrease pollution and release of forever chemicals? This would be a fantastic standard as we move to more laundered products. Sven might know a bit more about that, but I do know that there are standards being prepared on definitely on microplastics, for instance. And there are standards being prepared on laundering and so on. So there is work going on for sure. But on a more general, not only linked to PPE or not only linked to medical devices, of course, but more in general. But there is definitely work going on. I don't know, Sven, if you have something to add on that.
No, absolutely. This is the case. There's work on test methods, and there is work on the result interpretation of those test methods. It's on size of microplastics, particles, or industry launderers as producers, as parts of this particle load, because there's a lot of other societal influences as well. And of course, industrial laundries, they underlie a certain amount of national or European legislation already. So that has to be differentiated, but there's a lot of work and actually scientific finding on what could be the sources going on currently. Yes.
Okay, thanks for completing, Sven. Then I see more comments indeed, like, okay, times like COVID were unprecedented. And everybody was looking at practical approaches, of course, and to do it as quick as possible. But I would definitely hope, and I'm sure it is the case, we all learn from that situation and try to be a bit more prepared and better prepared for the next time, because it's, I don't think, to be honest, it's a question, will there be a next time? It's more a question, when will be the next time? So it's good to learn from all our experiences. And I know on different levels that's happening, also at Commission level. There's lots of things going on to be better prepared for the next time. The PPE or products for children have already been touched upon. Indeed, it is a topic. And again, very often when we talk about PPE and specifically, we don't think about children, because a lot of PPE are developed with work situations in mind. Within Europe, thank God, we already have for many, many years a ban on child labor. So we don't think about children when we're or when standards for PPE industrial use are developed. But then, of course, due to such a situation like COVID, we got to a point where PPE that were maybe originally thought for industrial use, all of a sudden became also used by the general public. And then, of course, you have this issue. So it's definitely something that is taken on board. I also see a comment from Laurent on the difference between gender and sex, mentioning also adaptation to morphology is a matter of sex. And he shares the definitions. I think we put that to the technical committees for their consideration and making sure they use the correct terms and words in their documents. Next is also a comment and a hint that, and I can confirm that indeed, since the 90s, if not longer, in many universities, there is work going on to study the anthropometrics, the ergonomic dimensions, and so on, of European workers, including working in SMEs. So there's a lot of work being done there, and I'm sure the respective TCs are aware of that, or I hope they are aware of that, so they can use it. And there, again, we could say we have a link with maybe TC 122, which is the ergonomics, and definitely have documents on that. Then another confirmation that microplastics are being considered in certain working groups, and there seems to be an ISO standard on biocompatibility of gas pathways whose limits are and where there is a link with the US limits. So that's again good, useful information. Thank you. Also in the textile CEN 248, there's a working group dealing with certain aspects, including microplastics. So again, a good hint. Then there's a question for combination products. It's quite long, so I haven't read it in advance, so I'll read it out here. So considering the main changes introduced by the regulation 745 on medical devices compared to the previous directive, as for example, that the systems can include non-medical devices and in particular other products which are in conformity with legislation that applies to those products only when they are used with a medical procedure or their presence in the system is otherwise justified, where the system means a combination of products and so on. Is it possible to use the Article 22 statement to justify the combination of both PPE and medical device? This will allow to avoid to have in place the agreements between two manufacturers, often competitors, and will allow to use certifications for medical devices and certifications for PPEs. I have in mind class 1 medical device for patient handling and pre-hospital procedures and class 3 for rescue procedures. I see, Mario, you're typing an answer, but maybe you can mention a few words on that for the complete group as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, indeed. I'm going to send now the reply to Catherine, but yes, my idea is that in principle, at the first glance, I will say yes, it will be possible to use this provision of the Article 22 of the medical devices regulation for this combination products, for the combination of a PPE or MD and medical devices, so maybe the same product with a different use and different components, let's say, no? But I have to say that this statement, this provision is rather general, and it will be convenient to investigate more, also involving my colleagues specifically dealing with combination products. So I'm going to invite Katarzyna to address to me this question, my email address, you know, to allow me to check it also with the colleagues in order first to give a more consistent reply, let's say, not only my opinion, and secondly, to take it into account for possible further guidance, because this point is interesting, is quite interesting, and to be taken into account for the work we can develop later on dual-use products.
Thank you, Mario, for that offer, and I think it's indeed interesting to be able to work further on that. Where was I? Yeah, another comment, rather, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approach brings always a holistic point of view, not only in setting up standards, but also in any decision-making processes. The new or the EU standardization strategy indicates to all of us that we can benefit with collaborative building capacities culture, fully agree. Then Horizon 2020 or Horizon Europe projects have delivered and are delivering exceptional outputs that could be valorized from any CEN CENELEC at CTC. Fully agree with that, and I can only make an appeal, and I've done it in the past at other occasions as well, to make sure that the R&D and standardization projects do not stop with a very nice prototypes or hopefully a bit closer to market, but indeed that they also share their experience, their knowledge they built in those projects with standardizers, so that their knowledge can be used for updating and making sure standards are state of the art. So a very warm appeal to all those projects to make that available, that knowledge. And I know it's not always, researchers are not always aware of what's going on in standardization and the other way around, but I'm also sure that CEN and CENELEC is also doing efforts on that. So point well taken. Then there's some information referring to specific standards, including adult and children headphones and so on. So we'll make sure that these get to the respective technical committees wherever it's necessary. There's also a question, but I see Mario is typing an answer, and it's probably a little bit out of direct scope as well in terms of quality management system certifications in the medical device. So Mario is going to answer on that in the Q&A. And it looks like I got to the end of the Q&A. There were some points that we took from the registrations, but if I look at those that are now on the screen, apart from the last one, I think we touched on all of those points already. The last one, but that's a very open question, of course. Any other input or experience that we are missing from today? I know that we are unable to touch on everything, and that's not necessary neither. Again, this is the first time we did this type of workshop together. So before, unless there are any burning questions or statements from one of the speakers, I would suggest that we open the last poll of the session, which is an open poll. So you can type a short answer. We've limited the number of characters, by the way, so don't start writing complete pages. It's going to be limited to one sentence. But the open poll, and that's you can also answer to that after the workshop. But the question is, please share your thoughts in a few words. For instance, what challenges do we need to overcome? Which dual-use product should be the focus? What kind of criteria should we review as an outcome of the webinar, and so on. So just whatever words come in mind or thoughts that can be useful for us, so that we get or we can continue to work on this. And I see there are some answers arriving already. So we'll leave that poll open till the end of the workshop, which means going to the next slide. That's probably no, okay. So to wrap up, to summarize a little bit, and I have to say thank you everybody, participants and speakers. You've made it a very interesting morning, at least from my point of view. And I see a few comments in the Q&A echoing the same. And definitely the input and the questions we received from the audience have been very useful as well. Looking at all that, I think we have some work to do indeed, and it has been mentioned several times, communication, and adding cooperation, cooperation. As I sometimes mention, the good old days of everybody staying in his little box or in his little corner are gone. There's no products or very little products that are only need to comply with one piece of legislation. You always have to look around what else is going on and what else do I need to comply with, which only means we need to really cooperate and well, ideally maybe rethink the whole structure of standardization, but that's a completely different discussion that we will not do here today. But we do need to cooperate. We do need to talk to each other. We do need to see what synergies we have and try to overcome the hurdles for all stakeholders involved. And I've heard several examples and also coming examples. I remember, for instance, the mentioning of the sensors included in PPE, where the sensors could be a medical device. So we also have that, which is completely different situation than a mask that is protecting the patient and protecting the wearer of the mask. So there's many angles to look at. I also remember, and I see also in the questions, that there is indeed a need for guidance on the legal side, but also guidance on how to apply all this in practice. So I think there's a need for further communication also with the Commission and maybe other stakeholders to see what we can do or what we can do on all that. So definitely, I would say this is not the end of the story. PPE medical devices, there is further work to do. And actually, I see in the Q&A also a comment from Ivan, who we didn't hear the whole morning. Ivan Arias Roldan, who is the policy officer or the desk officer for the PPE regulation at DG GROW. And he also mentions there that it's interesting to have examples with real cases of dual-use products showing obstacles and so on. So we'll definitely work on that, Ivan. You're absolutely right. It's good to have concrete examples, and this workshop can certainly be a start of doing that. And it's always easier to talk and discuss if you have concrete examples and understand and see what's going on rather than theoretical ideas. And indeed, there are means to work on with guidance, but also recommendation for use sheets from notified bodies and so on and so on. So that is all part also of this guidance that can be developed. With that, and I see some more comments further. With that, I think we can conclude for today, which means that we are within the set timetable. Perfect. Thank you again, and I would definitely echo the appeal from Ivan. If you have any examples, if you have any ideas, anything is more than welcome. You have the email from CCMC, or you might have, and we should look when we share the presentation, with all of you, and also the Q&A summary. And that will also be placed on the website, so it will be publicly available. If you go to the website of CEN CENELEC, to the past events, you will find the page where you were also able to register. The material will be placed there. We should see, maybe also with the speakers, if it's okay to share email address in that information, so that people can contact us directly with further feedback and ideas or examples. With that, I would say we can close for this morning, unless one of the speakers have some burning points to mention. And I see, by the way, in the meantime, that 34 of you have already typed in answers also to the third question. I'm sure we haven't answered all questions. The ones we didn't do, we will look at them also after the webinar. A lot of them have been answered in writing during the workshop. So again, those will be shared. And with that, I would like to thank the speakers for their active participation. If you thought a presentation of 15-20 minutes and that would be it, I'm sorry to have disappointed you. You got lots of questions, but I think that also makes it interesting. And clearly work to do for the future. And I would say with